Jeff Courier, the podcast edition.
On today's show, we got your thoughts on 30K zones perhaps coming to Winnipeg. There's a test project on right now, and it'll go through until the 23rd. Cattle farmers have been perhaps hardest hit by this drought. We talked to producer Tom Tycrob. Do men have enough real friends in their lives? And if not, what happens if you don't? Dr. Jay Greenfeld of Mind Matters Clinic spoke to us about that. Disconnecting while on vacation. We heard from columnist and broadcaster Matt Gurney, who did just that. And adult drownings on the rise. Dr. Christopher Love of the Life Saving Society gave us the lowdown on that one. I want to kick the show off this morning by asking you about a new plan by the City of Winnipeg. And it's a pilot project that starts today. And it has to do with reducing the speed limit on some residential streets from 50 kilometers per hour to 30 kilometers per hour. It's called the Neighborhood Greenway Reduced Speed Pilot Program. It's got a lovely name, but here's what it means in practical terms. Starting this week, Mockeray Avenue from Fife to Main and Powers Street from Dufferin to Partridge are going to be reduced to 30 kilometers per hour. And starting next week, a week from today, Eugenie Street from St. Mary's Road to Yeovil and Warsaw Avenue from Thurso to Pembina Highway will be reduced to 30 kilometers per hour as a pilot project. And this will carry on until the 23rd. So I want to ask you this morning at 780-6868. You can call or text at 780-6868 or gc@cjob.com. You can always send me an email. How do you feel about these pilot projects? And if the city is rolling this out as a pilot project, you know that it's going to be a dipping the toe, a test of the waters to see how this city reacts. How are we going to respond to the potential of 30 kilometer per hour speed limits on our residential streets? Because the city is not unveiling these pilot projects, but that it wants to see if we're ready to go for it citywide. That's the ultimate test, right? That's why these temporary speed limits are being rolled out. How are we going to respond, and how will we feel about it if it happens citywide? Right. 780-6868 or gc@cjob.com. I want to read you something from the City of Winnipeg release. This is the goal here. Greenways, which is it's called the Neighborhood Greenway Reduced Speed Program. The city says greenways are on-street routes designed to serve cyclists and pedestrians safely along motor vehicles. They typically include a range of treatments to achieve lower vehicle speeds and volumes, ranging from signage, bike signals, and pavement markings to varying degrees of traffic calming. Best practice is to have greenways operate at 30 kilometers per hour to both reduce traffic and improve cycling conditions. In other words, there are two goals here. They want to slow vehicles down, but it is a stated goal to get cars off those streets. So if you typically drive on those streets and you don't want to go for the 30K, you can probably find another way around it. If we wind up going citywide at 30K, there's no way around it. The goal is to get more vehicles off the road. That's the stated goal, to reduce traffic. So is this something, I want to know how you feel about this. At 780-6868, you can call or text. You can send me an email at gc@cjob.com. And I want to know if you think this is an idea whose time has come, or is it a potentially expensive solution to a non-existent problem? Where do you come down on this, right? Here's our first text that says, how stupid is it, that decision, now we have to watch our speed as cruise doesn't cut in till 40 kilometers per hour, so speed will be paying even less attention to the roadway. All right, Jeffrey, who do we have? Larry. Let's go to the phones this morning at 780-6868. Larry, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think?
Well, my thoughts are, why is it 50 or 30? What's wrong with 40? 30 is too slow. You can't keep an eye on the road. You're keeping an eye on your speedometer. My vehicle won't set. My cruise won't set at 30.
Right.
It'll set at 40. But why is it one or the other, 50 or 30? What's wrong with 40?
Do we need to reduce our speed limits at all on residential streets?
I don't even think so. But if the city feels that we have to, then what's wrong with looking at 40? What's this one or the other?
Yeah, Larry, I appreciate the call. Thank you so much for that. Here's an email at gc@cjob.com. It says, reduced speed, what a stupid, in capital letters, idea. We need to create ways of improving traffic flow, not reducing it. For a city our size, it takes too long to get around. Plus, they need to do more street repairs before we look at slowing things down. Does the city not have more important issues to deal with? All right, let's back to the phones we go. Shaw, good morning.
Reduce the speed, increase the fine. That's all it's about, man. They just want more of our money. So how better way to do it but to decrease the speed? It has nothing to do with public safety or anything like that. The bike ride lanes are thick enough, and it's not like there's an epidemic of cyclists out there. There's still cyclist sightings, but it's not as thick as if you were in Beijing or Rio or whatever. And another thing about it, you know what? It's not the speed that's the problem or the cars. It's the lousy subpar drivers. And I'm sure, Jeff, you've noticed recently that there's an uptick of people driving down the wrong way, one-way street. It happens all the time. It's about bad drivers being bad drivers behind big trucks. If you just slow down and drive for the conditions, there's no need in the world to give the city another way to get more money out of your pocket. Oh, you're doing 45. Oh, yeah, it used to be 50. Now it's 30. You're stuck with a 15-kilometer over the speed limit. Fine. Get lost. Have a great day.
All right, thanks, Shaw. Appreciate it. Here's a text that says, good morning, GC. Good morning, Jeff. I don't like the idea of slowing down the city even more. I think they should concentrate on having our street construction work around the clock to get things quicker. And why are trains always running through major intersections at rush hour? This is another project that could work on. Let's speed things up, councillors, not slow them down. Another text says, make it 30K province-wide. 50K is too fast in residential areas. I have 3 kids, and it's dangerous to play on the street. It's not like when I was a kid. People are too distracted and in a hurry. But you're not supposed to be playing on the road in the first place, are you? Right? This isn't 1956. Right? You're not supposed to be playing on the street. Back to the phones we go. Bill, good morning.
Hi. Am I there?
Yep.
Yeah. No, that fellow says 40 should be, to me, you have leeway. Anything after 40, they get nailed. And I see a lot of cops, there's not cops, but they're sitting in no parking zones beside the fire hydrants. They're just catching guys at 30. Like, it's a joke. And like the fellow said, you got to keep your eye on the speed. You got to go 18, 19. I just slow right down for the traffic.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
One more question.
Yep.
Where's all this money going for this coal vote? When the police give tickets and they get a paycheck to do that.
Where's the money going? Well, goes into city coffers. It helps.
Why does it all that money that the coal vote belongs to the nurses and all this stuff that belongs to the nurses and what coal vote, not to the government and the police department? They're getting paid to do those tickets. To me, it's a real cash grab.
All right, thanks very much. Here's another one that says 30 kilometer per hour speed limit is stupidity at its finest level. I've now heard something so stupid I've never heard something so stupid come out of City Hall yet. Here's a text message at 780-6868 that says, why is this needed? Is there more pedestrian accidents or something? Why is this suddenly a thing? Here's another one that Gary says, Jeff, I guess it gives the texters a better chance of stopping for a pedestrian. I'm tired of the bubble wrap mentality these days. When I was a youngster, we would walk to school and navigate streets and intersections. The problem with idiot-proofing society is that you create bigger idiots over time. Let's go back to the phones and talk to Chris. Chris, come on in.
Yeah, Jeff, they did a pilot project many years ago at Assiniboine, which caused a lot of feedback that people said we don't want it. Then they went to Exchange, and they did the same stupid thing. And I'm sorry, I hate using the word stupid, but in this, they qualified. They've earned this title. Many businesses who have put their hard-earned money into the Exchange have suffered a great loss because of these stupid lanes. More importantly, calling it green lane at 30 kilometers, you're increasing the emissions. And like your previous caller said, that when we all grew up, we navigated ourselves. There's a lot of education there, is look both sides and then cross. And to that caller or person who texted, like, play in the streets, are you kidding me? Like, what are we teaching our kids? Like, what pilot project? And more importantly, how much is this going to cost? We have bigger issues where we have homeless population, we have crime through the roof. Like, what is wrong with our city councilors? Are they going to stupid school?
Hey, all right, thanks very much, Chris. Here's another text says, I'm shaking my head at who uses cruise control at 40. Just a question. I'm laughing. I have no problem with it, by the way. It's a selected zones, and that to me is very reasonable. Again, we don't have to speed demons. Where are we going in such a hurry? Well, this is a pilot project, but it's to test to see if we would be ready to accept this citywide. Susan says, as of today, I'd be more impressed with if the city got their act together and had the school lights installed before the new school year arrives. Getting rid of vehicles on streets is a cyclist's dream, and they feel they are in the right. Back to the phones we go. Let's talk to Rocky. Robert. Robert, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Jeff. Good to speak with you.
And you too.
My stance on this issue, if everybody just did 50, this problem even wouldn't be being worried about. However, as you mentioned, the speed demons, 30, okay, maybe too slow in the school zone, but I used to have to get on the Ness Avenue when I drove, and before 30, it was crazy, but now I can. I would just settle for 40 as long as everybody stayed at 40. Thank you.
All right, now thank you very much for that. Here's an email at gc@cgob.com. Good morning. Reducing the speed limit isn't going to fix anything. Just make it slower to get around the city. I like the idea of certain streets being limited to 30 to benefit cyclists and pedestrians, especially on the weekends and holidays, but not a citywide blanket reduction. Let's go back to the phones and talk to Ty. Ty, good morning.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Now, initially, when I first heard it, I was kind of against it. But then I took a step back and I thought about it. Number one, you have to drive 30 in a school zone anyway, so most people should be used to it, so it shouldn't be as big deal as people are making it. Number two, if you honestly have to use cruise control in a 50 or 40 zone and you're worried about it being 30, maybe you should park your car and invest in a bike. Okay.
All right. Yeah, come on. But come on, Ty. That's, first of all, hang on a sec. Let me ask you a question. What is the problem with 50 kilometer per hour speed limits in the city?
In residential areas?
Yeah, what's
Nothing,
the problem?
But,
okay, thank you. Thank you. Nothing. So this is a solution to a non-existent problem. Right? If there's no problem, why are we even discussing it at the city level? Right? And that's, Here's an email at gc@cgob.com. It says, as a form of protest, anyone who's against this moronic slowdown should lean on their horns through the entire 30K zone. The complaints from those living there will definitely be heard by City Hall. We should be doing this in school zones beginning in September. Somebody else says residential streets have become parking lots, and I rarely, if ever, travel at 50K due to the fact that many have effectively become single-lane thoroughfares. We're already having to reduce our speeds for safety's sake. Thus, this pilot project is nothing more than a potential cash grab now that photo radar isn't producing the revenue it once did. Let's go back to the phones and talk to Steve. Steve, come on in.
Hey there. So if we're talking about residential streets that are just like bays and crescents and stuff like that, where it's just the people that live on those streets, I've got no problem with it going to 30. But anytime that you have basically it being a thoroughfare, like a through street, like or a connector street, where everybody else kind of comes off with the little bays and crescents and then works their way onto these feeder streets, those ones, they have to stay at 50, or otherwise it just slows everything way down, way too much. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is a non-existent problem that they're offering a solution for.
Completely.
Yeah.
The other thing is, years ago when we were kids, we used to play street hockey out in the street, and back then it would probably make more sense to have a 30K speed limit because we're always playing street hockey in the winter.
Yeah.
Or in the summer, or whatever.
But we don't do that anymore, right?
You don't do that anymore. Kids are like in bubble wrap, they're all inside or they're on play dates. So there's no sense to have any kind of a 30K for that reason.
Yeah, gotcha. Steve, thanks very much. Appreciate the call. Here's another text that says, why does the city think this will be followed? On my street, we have 1 block minimum for cars on weekends and a school speed limit. At best, 50% of motorists follow the rules. I'm under the impression that this is another naive attempt to pretend City Hall is doing something by edict without common sense. Let's squeeze Luke in here real quick. Luke, I can give you about 60 seconds. Let her rip.
Okay, no problem. It's absolutely a waste of money and time. There's absolutely no need for that. 50 is slow enough. Please, Winnipeg, please wake up. Let's do thoroughfares. Let's do 4-lane highways. Let's get traffic moving. That's it.
All right, and I appreciate the call. I do want to talk for the next little bit about how the current drought is impacting some of the people who put food on our table. In fact, it's impacting all of the people who put food on our table, perhaps no more so than our cattle producers. Now, I'm about to explain why. Our friend Tom Tycrob is a cattle producer. He produces west of the Interlake. That's be fair to say, Tom, a little bit west of the Interlake?
You bet. We're on the west side of Lake Manitoba.
10 years ago, you and I were talking about floods, and you had so much water that your cattle feed was rotting in the field, and you had to go out and buy some. Now we're in the middle of this drought cycle. What's life like for you these days?
Well, not only for me, Jeff, but for many, and it is tough to navigate through this. Just to give you perspective, Jeff, so just before you had called, I was looking at last year's stats from my feed inventory that I would give for, hand in for feed production for crop insurance. And so over 1,000 bales or 1,000 units, if you will, for your listeners, Jeff, off 340 acres. This year we're at 283 on exactly the same acres. It's really, really, really concerning. Even more concerning, Jeff, I was on my very last piece cutting hay just 2 days ago. This would have been about midday, and the machine that I use is comparable to, if you could pretend, an oversized lawnmower. It works very much like a lawnmower, cuts very low to the ground. The same idea, just bigger footage, and it started fires. About noon, I started one fire, got it out very, very quickly, and then about an hour later, it obviously struck a rock again in a spark and started another fire, which I almost could not get out on my own. And of course, I just pulled out because I just didn't want to take the risk of losing what was left there. So it's serious, Jeff.
Now, we do go through these flood and drought cycles, Tom, right? I mean, and you've seen them come and go. Have you ever seen one this extreme? I mean, last year was really dry, but have you ever seen anything quite this extreme?
I certainly have not. I don't, I can think back to, as I had mentioned earlier, too, I can think back to 2003-04. It was relatively dry. I do have member discussions with producers who were very concerned at the time, and even in the last couple of years, 3 years, like 18, 19, they were certainly, you can probably remember the stories, Jeff, of the Interlake there. There were, producers looking for water and for feed, and we're hauling it in from a long ways away. This is extreme. Beyond the scope of the drought, and as serious as it is, Jeff, what is equally as concerning now is again the nature of the fires and how quickly they could consume what is left. And then on top of that, of course, with droughts always come grasshoppers. So it's a far cry, Jeff, from 10 years ago, as you mentioned, where we were able to look out of our house and literally see whitecaps and rotting feed, and now we are in the exact opposite spectrum of that.
So what impact then, Tom, does this have on your ability to grow feed for your cattle?
It's paramount. Without rain, as anybody is aware, nothing is green and nothing grows, and so what we are very fortunate with, Jeff, is that 2 years ago in 2019, at the time we didn't think it was a blessing, but the snowstorm actually was, and so with that we actually ended up with 9 inches of precipitation. And that moisture not only filled, our water reserves, dugouts, etc., but it also proved to be absolutely huge for 2020 feed production. And that's why last year, even the numbers I quoted you earlier, which was over 1,000 units on 340 acres, that's not even our typically good average. Like, we're typically higher than that, but that is what produced our feed last year. So it's become very, very difficult because there's nothing there for reserve, and the various feed stuffs that I grew this year, grain feed and my hay there, it's just not going. And just late last night, we were out scouting the corn, which is typically a very drought-tolerant and very sure, feed source for us, and it's burning up as well. So we'll certainly be looking at sourcing feed elsewhere and different types of feedstuffs to be able to push ourselves through. And Jeff, at this stage here, I'm not exactly sure how we pull that off, even without some type of having a little bit of a culling plan here to reduce our numbers, and we certainly do not want to go that way.
Tom, even if you wanted to buy from Saskatchewan or Alberta, could you right now? Because they're kind of in the same boat as we are, aren't they?
I think, Jeff, right now, even if I could, I'm not sure I would. I think what I would consider, rather than hauling feed here, I would probably look at hauling my cows to the feed. It's oftentimes the more fiscally responsible thing to do, rather than hauling a bunch of feed, is taking your cows to the feed and finding a way to do and now
so you just pasture them somewhere. You pasture them elsewhere.
Yeah, you either get them to winter feed somewhere else and pay somebody to do it, and or pasture them somewhere else, or the other option is culling. And for right now, as you had mentioned, Jeff, it is dry across Western Canada. I think it would be extremely difficult right now to find a place for our livestock anywhere outside of culling them. And that is happening. As a matter of fact, there was just a sale last week, and I was contacted by my local auction market, which typically shuts down, Jeff, for the summer, and they have had requests to open up so that people can at least call maybe some of the animals that they would, maybe some of the animals that don't have to be there. Maybe it's cows that are not pregnant. Maybe it's animals that they're keeping over that they normally would be able to feed and call later in the fall. They're looking for a place for them right now.
That's tragic, though, isn't it, Tom? To think that you're going to have to reduce the size of the herd, and a lot of the producers are going to do that. I mean, it conjures up images of BSE.
It does, Jeff, and I think the most frustrating thing for us is, as people who absolutely love this industry and have been a part of it for most of our lives, When you look at Jeff, I'm a producer at 54. I certainly do not plan to exit the industry, and even this year, if we have to cull, I don't think it would have to be at an extreme level. But for some producers, it is. And those producers at my age and perhaps even younger, if you are already, having to manage a debt that is just barely being serviced by the numbers that you have, and then being forced to cull at an inopportune time where you're not going to perhaps get the prices that you normally would and the demand for the livestock that you're selling, it's very difficult to imagine that those producers would be able to come back in or would want to come back in. So we do not want to see that.
If you do sell off, Tom, who's buying these days, and what kind of prices are you getting?
Well, at this stage here, Jeff, I can't completely fairly answer your question other than to say you're going to be selling into a buyer's market, meaning that you will sell at a reduced rate, because the people that are buying your cattle may be potentially in a situation where they have equity position, meaning that they're beyond having to service debt, and this is an opportunity for them to buy in at an opportune time, and they would perhaps sell the cattle and retain the land, and then bring the cattle back in when they can. And again, that is never a good option when we think about maintaining the herd numbers and the bigger herd numbers, because it typically, again, those producers exit, and very rarely do you see the numbers return to historic levels.
Wow, you going to make it through the year? I mean, is there a chance that anybody could actually get forced out of the business, Tom? Is it that extreme?
Well, it certainly can be. There is. I was able to touch base with some friends of ours from. They're up in the Fork River Dauphin area, and there are certainly spots out there, Jeff, that have had the opportune showers that are hanging in there. And for example, yesterday we did get a chance with my family to drive over to Riding Mountain, and there are spots over there that are green. But even there is reduced production because, as you remember, Jeff, we had a really late killing frost that took out a lot of crops, like canola and beans and some of those more sensitive crops to frost, and it also did a good number on the alfalfa. So even the good stands were where the areas were decent. But east of that area up there, they have an extreme situation with grasshoppers, and from what I understand, there is a particular producer up there who is just now making arrangements to completely sell out and move away from the industry. So just because he is forced to, he's simply looked at the last three collective years, 18, 19, and 20, and again, 18, 19, and 20 were dry. And like I said, in light of that one storm that we had that provided a little bit of moisture, it's been really 3 years of dry weather, and this particular producer has made a decision that he is now making arrangements to completely sell out, and that is cattle, stock, lock, and barrel, completely exiting the industry. So it has come to that.
Gosh, Tom, that's and I just got a text from another one of our friends says, we farm just 30 north of Winnipeg, and we are worse off than the gentleman you spoke to. And I think this will be my last year in cattle. I sold 6 head last week just to test the market, and it has already dropped by 15%. Oh boy, this is really brutal stuff. I mean, this is as tough as it was, like I say, 10 years ago when you were flooded out.
Well, it really is, and interestingly, one of my kids asked me the other day, what would I prefer? Which end of the spectrum would I be on? And I said, well, neither are useful, right? When you're getting to the point where your feed is rotting in water, and you can't produce feed, and you have to evacuate and move to other areas, that becomes self-defeating too. In this situation here, I guess, Jeff, what I will say, and just as an aside, Jeff, I don't know if you saw it, but I text you a before and after picture just a little while ago. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at it or receive that, but it gives you a perspective of what it is looking like at the real picture. And it's in the picture represents the same place and time as you would be able to see it if you were able to have a chance to view it. But you can't. You can only navigate through something like this for so long, and sooner or later, for those of us in the industry, irregardless of what your equity position is or isn't, if your business does not generate a profit, there is no use in expiring what you already have.
Yeah. Tom, I'm sorry that that this year has turned out to be such a struggle for everybody in agriculture, of course, but perhaps most acutely for folks who do what you do, which is being in cattle production. So, hang in, and we'll talk again down the road, and hope for some rain.
You bet, Jeff, and I do hope, and I've said this to you before, I do hope one day you and I can chat, and I can tell you about the absolutely wonderful year we've had in the production, and to be able to tell your listeners that there are good years, and there are hopefully they're coming soon.
Yeah, no kidding. Tom Tycrob is one of Manitoba's cattle producers. He farms just west of the Interlake. How many good friends do you have? And this is specifically addressed to the men. And I'm not talking about just buddies. We've all got a million buddies, people we call friends, but I mean that close, tight circle of friends. Do you have a person or a couple of people in your life? Well, I came across an interesting article recently in the National Review, and the headline is a grabber, which is headlines are supposed to do. It says, American men suffer a friendship recession. Declining religious involvement, lower marriage rates, and changes in the workplace may be creating a surge of disconnection. Now, we know that typically women do way better at establishing and maintaining close relationships than men. And that's especially true as we age. The older men get, the more challenging it is for them to establish those really tight personal relationships. And I want to talk about that for the next little bit, because this is important stuff. And our friend Dr. Jay Greenfield is a clinical psychologist at Mind Matters Clinic, joins us this morning. Jay Greenfield, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Great to connect again, as always.
All right, now here's the thing I say about men, because we have spent a lot of time in the last few decades trying to open a lot of doors and kick down doors and break glass ceilings for women. But here's a reality, that boys are more likely to fall behind in school. Mm-hmm. They are more likely to drop out of school. They are underrepresented in post-secondary education. They are more likely to be homeless. They are more likely to have addiction problems and mental health issues, and are more likely to commit suicide. What's happened to us?
Well, there are a number of things, and this has been going on for a while. And you kind of nailed it with a lot of the glass ceilings that we're breaking and doors are breaking down and this kind of stuff for women. But there are different things that are attended to for men. And one of the biggest things that I recall from the research I was involved with men and masculinity a while ago was the idea of the concept of masculinity is still very important to men. And so therefore, they still have a lot of common norms of not as emotionally invested in connecting with other men and other people, because they need to present themselves as being very masculine. So they don't have the same intent on expressing their emotions, on getting into deeper conversations. That doesn't mean they don't have good friends, and that doesn't mean they can't have good friends, but of the ones that they invest in, they're not as emotionally invested in those relationships as women tend to be. And then as a result of that, it starts to create this disconnect, because then as they get older, they focus more of their energy on work because it's functional. And they don't pay as much attention to the depth of what they're sort of lacking. And then it leads to all those other things that you listed.
So is it we're, as men, that we're not aware that we're becoming disconnected, or I mean, I'm having sort of trouble wrapping my head around that.
Well, yeah, it's not as much a lack of awareness. Sometimes it is, because there are a lot of men out there who have no idea that this is even important. because they've operated the way they've operated, and that's kind of how it is, right? It reminds me of years ago when I was supposed to be involved in some relief work after Hurricane Katrina, and the theme there was we need people to work with men because right now, the men are coming out of their homes and they just want to fix other people's homes, and the women are coming out of their homes and they just want to support their friends, right? And it was so distinct, and that was nearly 20 years ago. And it's the same pattern. They may be aware of it, but oftentimes their brain very quickly goes to, what do I need to do to fix the problem? What do I need to do to fix this? And they don't recognize, if you can't see it, it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. But it's the emotional side of things that on an in-depth level, they might not always be aware of it, and they just assume, well, I've been friends with this person for a long time, so they're my friend. But they don't really have that much of an in-depth connection with them.
Yeah.
And then therefore, it just becomes commonplace.
And men, we're just sort of by nature fixers, and it's something that our female partners often complain about. They'll express a problem to us, and the first thing we want to do is fix it. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily what they're looking for.
Well, that's exactly it. And then when you have other men who are friends with each other, they try and exhibit the same patterns. Where sometimes, let's say, they might have male friends who are struggling with something, and you have that analogy of sort of being stuck at the bottom of a well. And you have that other male friend that comes in and says, let me get you some water, let me get you a rope, let me get you the ladder, let me get you something to get you out of here. And their friend looks at them and says, I just want you to sit with me in the dark well. We don't need to do anything right now. And that step gets missed. And then when that step gets missed, male friends end up struggling with certain things without feeling comfortable expressing it because of the desire to maintain a certain degree of masculinity. And then more importantly, though, it leads to oftentimes something referred to as masking depression, where they may feel depressed and they may feel a low mood, but they compensate by working more, or they compensate by playing a lot more video games or drinking and engaging in all the other stuff that you had listed. And then they develop those patterns, but then completely miss the window of opportunity to strengthen actual friendships.
So if your buddy's struggling,
mm-hmm.
sometimes maybe the best thing you can do is just sit beside him, put your arm around him, and say, have a beer.
Yeah.
You don't have to try to fix it. Right?
Well, that's exactly it. And ideally you want to avoid relying on any kind of substance, but sometimes that's all it is. And
right.
If that's a common place, and it could be something like that, or it could be, classic examples of like throwing a ball or whatever it is,
right.
Or oftentimes just even listening to music together, because sometimes the music can get certain feelings out that you can't really express. But just that few minutes to sit here and say, we're not fixing anything. We're just going to sit together here.
Yeah, I said have a beer. I didn't mean put the whole box away, right?
Right, exactly. So, but that kind of thing of really just sitting there and saying, you know what, it's okay to, one, provide that space for that male friend. Secondly, be open and candid about sharing your own experiences. The challenge that a lot of times happens with other men is that they don't want to show any kind of weakness around anybody else, because God forbid they should show that kind of weakness, right? And so then they don't disclose anything, and then it's just like, well, I'll help you with what you're struggling with, but I'm not really going to personalize it here, despite the fact that all it can do is help increase the empathy.
But don't you think, Jay, that if we had more close friends, that fear of vulnerability would fall away? If we had somebody who was really close to us,
mm-hmm.
we wouldn't fall into that sort of stereotypical men don't want to share their feelings stuff.
Yeah.
Which I don't believe. I think men desperately do want to do that, but they don't know who to share it with.
Right, or how to. Right? They don't know who and how. And it's a combination of, I think you're right. If they're able to do that, it would make things easier. And it's not even about a quantity thing. Right? It's about the quality, because the other challenge that's come up in the last number of years is the frequency to which people are moving. People are moving all over the place. People are moving quite frequently. The work environment changes, where most people are, especially in the last year or two here, are working from home, and it's not the same connection. And so it takes a lot more effort to make those connections. And then some folks might be involved in adult leagues and that kind of stuff, but we also know the frequency of connecting with other men decreases drastically after those teenage years. And the key here is to be a lot more intentional about setting something up with one male friend to start with, and not changing the dynamic of the friendship, but changing what and how you're speaking to each other, even if it's less common. Because you can say, I have this best friend and we've been best friends for 20 years, but they don't really know anything about you.
Yeah.
And that gap becomes even greater as men get older.
Well, you're right. And that's one of the things I mentioned at the outset, Jay. As men get older, establishing those close personal relationships becomes even more challenging. We know that, for example, widows do much better than widowers. Because women already have a number of relationships, but they're better at establishing new relationships as they age than we are.
And part of the reason why that happens is because that's also commonplace for them, right? They've been doing it their whole lives, right? Where men haven't done that as much. And so it's harder for them, especially as they're older, because they don't even know what to do.
Yeah, according to this article, which you and I have been both reading, it says single men fare the worst. 1 in 5 American men who are unmarried and not in a romantic relationship report not having any close friends. That's a lot of guys out there with nobody. Yeah. They don't have a person.
And that's partly what happens, right? Because their other male friends that they may have had end up getting married, or end up having their own kids, or end up just having their energy focused on different things, where those folks that aren't in that situation then don't know where to reach. And they don't even know sort of like where to begin.
Well, okay, our lifestyles are very different from those of our parents and grandparents. The guys who went out and fought the Second World War or the Korean War had their army buddies with whom they had shared the most intimate, grueling details of their lives. There was a bond there that was unlike any other, right? Your brothers in arms.
Yeah.
And even through the 60s and 70s, as North Americans still went to church in large numbers, that there were social circles that were created, and people were less mobile. You know, our parents and grandparents tended to be born, raised, grow up, live, and die in the same town. But you talked about the increasing mobility. You know, a lot of people who live in this city didn't come from here, so they didn't grow up with their school friends who become lifelong friends, and that's true in every major city, right? So we're looking at this confluence of a whole lot of factors that have led to this isolation.
And that's exactly why I was sort of alluding to that earlier. It's a combination of a number of things, both our society and the way that we're doing things, as well as certain expected norms. And in addition to all of that, you have something random like what's happened since the pandemic started. And you can't predict those things. But I think the biggest challenge here is a lot of people are constantly starting again, where if they did come from the same city or same town or same neighborhood or same whatever it is, it was a lot easier, right? It's like the book titled A Little Life of these 5 friends who really grew up in a small circle, and that's what established their confidence and their communication skills with anybody. But we don't have that because people are moving so often, and it's not even just moving cities, but it's also moving jobs, because a lot of men had that pattern of connecting with their friends at work. But if they're constantly changing jobs, they start to develop this idea that, well, I'll just have to find other friends. And so there isn't a stronger stance of, no, these people are going to be with me for a while. Because in your head, you're thinking, well, I might be at a different job in a couple of years, and I also could be in a different city. So we'll see how this goes.
Yeah, we've become a generation of army brats moving around.
Very much so. And in addition to that, though, we've also become this generation of focused on more on the self than the collaborative piece. When you talk about the references to the Second World War and the additional wars after that, there's a different type of camaraderie, right? And whether it's that or other things, there was more reliance on the neighbor and that concept of it, because that's, like you were talking about, parents and grandparents, that's what they were surrounded by. And now you shift in the 80s and 90s, and then more importantly, in the 2000s and 2020s, here we are, this big focus on you do what you have to do for yourself. And that's why these jobs are changing so quickly, and that's why people are moving, because they're just picking up on their own and going. And then it doesn't allow for those other connections to be as long-lasting as they used to be.
Well, are there any solutions?
There are. I mean, there are some. There are some. It's just a matter of how invested people want to be. And one of them is, of course, talking about these things to start with, right? People are going to know you better, and you're going to know yourself better if you openly talk about the things that you're thinking and that you're feeling. Your wants, your desires, all that kind of stuff that you normally don't talk about but you think about, right? So, and it might not start with another male friend, but it might start with somebody else who you're close enough to, and then you want to bridge that to a male friend. Secondly, you want to get yourself involved in some sort of regular men's group type of thing, right? Like one of the things that I had referenced some other folks to is the Canadian Med Shed Association, right, where men are getting together. And then, of course, because, we discussed this before, but less of a focus on the religious community aspect, right? As those numbers shift in a variety of different religions, if that's not there, still finding other ways to connect with other men. And again, if it's not a religious group, still a cultural group that has some commonality with other men. And allowing for that to happen on a regular basis leads you to know that that's coming, right? Oh, that's coming every Monday, or that's coming every Thursday. You know that that's coming. And the inverse relationship of stress and social support is so pronounced that if you can have that, your stress will be less. And that spans the age range of as young as 10 to as old as 90, right, or above. Like you really need to make sure that that's there, because then the other piece also that happens after, let's say, 75, 85, 95, those numbers start to dwindle because of just age.
Right.
So you got to be able to have that skill to adjust.
Yeah, the cynical joke I always make is I say I'm going to have to be cremated because I haven't got 6 friends to bury me.
Right, and I've heard that before. And the reality is you want to think like that.
It's no joke, right?
Well, that's the point, and that's what I say to a lot of men who I see at the clinic, and even just friends of mine or whoever. It's the idea of, we don't know how this is going to end, and we weren't here really for the beginning. So what are you doing in between, so that when you get to the end, you know who those 6 people will be? Yeah. And if you don't know, start to pay attention to how you can create that.
Yeah. Jay Greenfeld, always great to have you on the show. Thank you for this conversation today.
Always a pleasure, Jeff. Thanks again for having me on, and have a great week.
Dr. Jay Greenfeld is a clinical psychologist at Mind Matters Clinic. If you've gone on vacation this summer, and I know a lot of you have, then have you been able to disconnect? Have you been able to unplug? Just walk away from the social media, to not read your work emails. And you say, oh, well, I don't want them to pile up. But it takes a certain measure of discipline to do that, or a certain measure of resolve. And my next guest was able to do that. He's our good friend, Matt Gurney. He's a great broadcaster, great newspaper columnist, and joins us from Toronto today. Matt, welcome back. It's good to chat with you. Welcome back from vacation.
Hey, no, it's good to be here. Like I'm jumping in with both feet. I mean, I got a column to write. I just finished my own show. I'm doing your show now. Like, when I end a vacation, I don't mess around.
You're not fooling around. Where did you go?
You know what? I didn't go anywhere. I have a cottage north of the city, and I spent some time there. I had a bunch of to-dos to do around the house. My family is now vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. My wife's fully vaccinated. Both sets of our parents are fully vaccinated. So we're actually getting to the point where we're able to function a little bit as a family. And one of the things that means is that my mom or my mom-in-law can watch the kid for a day, whereas my wife and I do that, traditional Canadian vacation thing of like clean the entire house and like, just do stuff like that. So we didn't go anywhere. To me, like just doing things that were different was all that I needed to do for this vacation, because I the last 18 months, I've been working from home. My wife's a teacher, but her school was closed, so she's been teaching from home. My kids have been doing school from home. What we really needed was a break in the routine, just to change things up a bit. So, yeah, we went to the cottage, or we could go to the park. Toronto is just starting to reopen now. Like we've been a little bit slow to reopen for reasons we can get into another day. But it's starting to, right? So having a drink on a patio, playing some golf, just things that a year or two ago we would not have taken for granted, but they feel magical now.
Yeah, that's so true. But even being able to go to the lake, up in cottage country where your place is, Matt, it's such a huge thing to be able to do. But we all fall in, when I say we all, many of us fall into the problem of not disconnecting when we go on vacation. We say we're on vacation, but we're still checking our work emails. We still are on the social media. We're looking at Twitter. We're looking at Facebook. We're looking at Instagram. We're on TikTok. Whatever it is. What did you do to, in absent being able to just leave the province or the country and go someplace with the family? What did you do to disconnect from all that stuff?
I deleted all of my communication apps off my phone, and I put my laptop computer away in a closet. Your listeners might think I'm exaggerating there, but that's actually literally what I did. So my computer, like I have an old computer I use for like video gaming, and believe me, I played that thing over the last couple of weeks. But I have a computer that I do all my work-related stuff with, and I just put it away. I just for the next 11 days, I don't need you. You can go on a shelf, and I will just ignore you. But for me, it's my phone. My wife will tell you there's 3 people in our marriage: her, me, and my iPhone. And I have such a conflicted relationship with this damn device, which, for the record, I'm holding in my hand and speaking into right now. But I have the Kindle app. I have a bunch of reading apps on this. I have Netflix. I have streaming music. So this little glowing rectangle is, for me, is a lifeline to relaxation and entertainment. But it's also where I have all my work email coming and all my social apps coming. And it's kind of it's this thing that brings both pleasure and pain, right? Like I'll be streaming a TV show and I'll be watching something fun, or I'll be listening to some great tunes via one of the streaming apps. And then I'll get a work email and it's just boom, my mellow is totally harsh. It's ruined. So I just thought for this vacation, I'm just going to delete all the email apps. I'm literally going to turn them all off. I deleted all my social media apps because social media, again, is a mix of pleasure and pain. I just got rid of them. And I told my wife, we were together most of the vacation, but whenever we were apart, I'm like, let's do it old school. Send me a text message. Like, if you actually need to get me, shoot me a text. I told my immediate family, my parents, the same thing. I will only be reachable either with text message or an actual telephone call. And I deleted all my apps for chat apps, with one exception. There's one app I actually am in some groups of local parents for kids kids with play dates or things like that. I didn't think I should delete that in case someone needed to reach me in case of emergency, so I muted it. And I would check it every so often for messages. But other than that, I just ignored it. I cannot begin to tell you how little I miss this stuff. And, you're totally addicted. You're totally caught up in it. And probably, for the first day or so, I kind of had that FOMO, right? That fear of missing out of, well, what if I got an email? It didn't last long. And, this morning when I reinstalled some of the apps, I'm not going to lie to you, man, it hurt. I did not enjoy the experience of reconnecting with the world.
There's a guy named Michael Harris who wrote a book about isolation a few years ago, and had him on the air at the time. And I think Michael Harris's name. I could be getting that wrong. I'm just kind of going on memory here, Matt. But his theory was that the use of social media, responding to texts, responding to emails right away, or as soon as we send something out on Facebook or Twitter, we look immediately to get that response. He says we're like apes who need to be groomed constantly. That this is our form of grooming, of knowing that somebody's paying us some attention. And sometimes, and getting away from that might not be such a bad thing.
Well, you know what? What I think of, and I mean, you and I are we got a few years left in this yet. We're not quite ready for the scrap heap, but we're both old enough to remember a very different media ecosystem, right? Where you got your newspaper actually sprayed onto a dead tree, and some kid would hurl it onto your front step in the morning, and you'd read that, and you'd actually be reasonably well informed. And it would be something you'd get out of the way over your morning coffee, or maybe you're riding the train or to work or riding the bus, whatever. If you were really well connected, you would listen to the kind of show that you or I would host, right? And you'd have your car radio program for a local news station. If you wanted to go the extra mile, maybe once you're home at the end of a busy day, you'd watch the 6 o'clock news or even one of the national broadcasts at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. There was no real analog to the kind of constant flow of information and communication that we deal with now. This is all incredibly new, and I think we should recognize that. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not lamenting it. I've made my career in this media and information ecosystem, and I think it has some advantages. But we shouldn't be blind to the fact that 20 years ago, the amount of information we're being constantly exposed to, and information can mean news, it can mean entertainment, it can mean communication from your friends and your family, is insane. We are all drinking from a fire hose, but I don't think we notice it much of the time because it happens slowly. It's the frog in the boiling pot, right? You just turn that temperature up a little bit. Think about the technical progress in the last 20 years. I remember almost exactly 20 years ago getting my first cable internet connection and thinking, my God, I can download a song in 20 seconds instead of, 5 hours, right? And in order to do it, I actually needed to have a bundle of wire coming into my house from outside that plugged into my desktop computer with a big cathode ray tube monitor. I want that song now. I buy it with a thumbprint on the supercomputer I carry in my back pocket. So we shouldn't ignore the benefits of this, and certainly during the pandemic. I mean, thank God we had the ability to stay connected and stay entertained remotely. But every once in a while, turning it all off, putting your phone away, picking up an actual physical book, and only getting your news by glancing at that morning paper or listening to a lunchtime radio broadcast, looking at the 6 o'clock news on TV, even for a news junkie like me, it was a weird experience to basically step back to the media ecosystem of, say, like 1990, right? Yeah. And I don't know if I like all of it. I don't know if I recommend it for everyone or forever. But I got to say, man, at least for the period of a vacation, unplug. Take some time off. You won't miss it. You might get kind of twitchy when you worry about those emails you're not checking, but overall, strongly recommend.
Well, it's sort of like your first couple of days without coffee, right? You get a little cranky for a day or so, and after that, you're fine.
Yeah, it's funny because, I did keep my phone on me most of the time because I told my wife to text me or call me or my mom or dad or whatever, right? In case of emergency, give me a call. So I had the phone on me in my pocket, but it wasn't connected to anything. I actually had a smartphone that, if you could believe it, was actually a telephone again. And
wow.
So I kind of had this instinctive, habitual reflex of sticking my hand in my pocket, pulling out the phone, and looking at the screen for notifications. And there were none because there was nothing to be. There was nothing connected to it. It couldn't notify me of anything.
Here we are.
So
we're chimps looking
weather bulletin.
Chip's looking to be groomed. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for this, because this is really important stuff, especially during these summer months when so many of us are taking some holiday time. And it's a good reminder that, you can live without this stuff.
you live better without this stuff. And like I said, like I admit, I kept my music app, right? Because I still wanted to be able to listen to songs.
Yeah.
We should be better at embracing the good this technology brings us, but also imposing some disciplined limits on ourselves to skip some of the bad.
Matt Gurney, great broadcaster and columnist. We check his stuff out in the National Post and elsewhere, and is one of our great friends of this show. And so, Matt, welcome back to work. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Matt Gurney spoke to us today from Toronto. This time of year, and especially after a year of a lack of swimming lessons and so forth, we often think about children and water and safety and potential drownings. But it turns out that unintentional fatal drownings in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand is showing a rise in older adults drowning. Dr. Christopher Love is with the Life Saving Society and joins us today. Christopher, welcome back.
Good to talk to you again, Jeff.
What have you learned in this study and the swath that it takes?
It is, as you said in the introduction, it's an increasing area of concern for us, and this study, which has just come out, jointly done by Canadian and Australian researchers, is showing we're seeing an increase in the three nations you mentioned for that older adult age group, so the age 65 plus. And if we break it down to raw numbers and something that can really hit home, it was a 10-year study. It reviewed 2005 to 2014, and during that time period, with 812 older adults, 65 and older, who died due to drowning here in Canada. And that's just the Canadian part of the study. And that's a huge number. And it's one that's increasing because based upon the data that they had, the researchers are predicting that if we don't do something to reduce this incidence of drowning, we potentially could be seeing, by the year 2030, we could be seeing between 200 and 400 older adults dying in Canada every year if these trends continue.
That would be an alarming number to you, wouldn't it?
It is an extremely alarming number, and certainly we're taking the results of this study seriously and looking at how can we target these older adults to reduce that death toll and prevent us from getting to those estimated population projection numbers.
What's at the root of this, do you think, Christopher? Is it a case of lack of swimming knowledge as young people that carries us into adulthood? Is it that we have more newcomers to Canada who don't have experience in swimming or boating or being around water? I mean, how do we explain this?
There are probably a few different explanations, and the researchers on this study looked at a few of them. One of the things they found was if you're between 65 and 74 years of age, you're probably actually going to have a drowning incident in a natural body of water. So that's a lake, a river, an ocean. And they form a significant proportion, a significant percentage of our boating deaths, our drowning deaths that occur during boating excursions. And so focusing on getting people used to being in natural water and what to do if you get into trouble and being safe while you're boating, certainly an area we have worked on and will continue to work on. For the 75-plus age group, they actually found the most significant location for those people to drown was either bathtubs or private backyard swimming pools. And so that, again, looks at, okay, we need to target differently depending upon the age group. And they found there's probably some medical conditions that are contributing to this, but that wasn't something they could tease out easily with the data so far. And so we're going to have to look at that. And then they were able to find a significant risk factor for this age group, and over 20% of cases was alcohol or intoxication involvement. And so that's an area we've worked on in the past, and we'll continue to get the message out that being intoxicated while in, on, or near the water is a serious risk factor for injury or death.
And those are, of course, entirely preventable.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we continue to do this work is the vast majority of drowning deaths are 100% preventable. It's something that doesn't have to happen, but it does have a huge impact on family, friends, loved ones of those who do die or are seriously injured. But it has a further impact in terms of economic terms on Canadian society at large, health care and everything like that. And so there are many, many reasons why everybody should be concerned about this and helping to educate and bring those numbers down by making sure there's safe behavior happening.
Is that a little counterintuitive for you, Christopher, to think, and we're almost out of time here, but to think that the older adults are the ones who are supposed to know better than to drink and jump in a pool?
You would think, but unfortunately we have seen over the years, and this is just another reinforcement that older does not necessarily mean wiser, and so everybody, no matter your age, needs to be thinking about water safety before you go out for boating, swimming, or anything else.
Well, Christopher, thank you very much. I appreciate the heads up, and we hope that those numbers start trending back in a better direction.
We certainly agree, and thank you very much for the opportunity to get the word out.
Dr. Christopher Love is with the Life Saving Society. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We're available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Subscribe now, never miss an episode. If you like what you hear, rate the show and tell us what you think, and tell a friend about the podcast. Until next time.
I'm Sarah Ritchie. I'm a reporter for Global News in Halifax. I was working the day everything changed in Nova Scotia last April. My team has spent the last year asking tough questions about how a gunman disguised as a police officer murdered 22 people over 13 hours. On our podcast, 13 Hours Inside the Nova Scotia Massacre, we examine this tragedy hour by hour. We're learning there's a lot more to this story. Listen to all 13 episodes now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.